Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
The conversation over ranked choice voting in Duluth is heating up. Tonight we have pro and con opinions from representatives of groups on opposite sides of the issue.
A legendary Iron Range publisher passed away this week in Chisholm. Tonight we'll learn more about the life and philosophy of Veda Ponikvar in her own words.
And we'll have the latest business headlines and a news file story from 25 years ago.
So don't miss this one. Almanac North is next. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. Julie, we lost a very influential person in northern Minnesota this week with the death of publisher Veda Ponikvar.
That is true, and I understand the two of you had some shared history.
We got together fairly often professionally. 38 years ago this week, in fact, she and I were at a day-long briefing in the White House with President Jimmy Carter. It just happened to be 38 years to the day she died.
A remarkable woman.
Yeah. All right, thank you. We'll have more about her life and her legend coming up, but first, let's get started with our first topic.
All right. Thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone. Besides electing a new mayor and several city councilors in the upcoming Duluth election, there are a couple of other issues on the ballot. One of them would change the way city elections are held in Duluth. A measure known as ranked choice voting would eliminate the need for a primary, potentially saving the city money. But opponents say ranked choice voting is confusing and could actually suppress voter turnout. Well, here now is Katie Humphrey, manager of the Duluth Better Ballot campaign, which favors ranked choice voting. And Kathryn Lenz is an associate professor emeritus of math at UMD and a member of the Keep Voting Simple, Vote No group. And ladies, thank you so much for being here tonight. Really appreciate you coming in on a Friday night.
Thank you.
Katie,
Thanks for having us.
Katie, let's start with you. If you could give us kind of the Cliff's Notes version of ranked choice voting for people who might not be familiar with what it is and how it works.
Absolutely. So to some, this is a new concept. And what it is an improvement to the way we could elect city councilors and the mayor here in Duluth. And instead of having a high-cost, low-turnout primary to winnow the field of candidates down to just a few choices, you're able to rank your choices in order of your preference in one election in November, which would simulate the primary and the general. So it's more efficient, it rolls two elections into one, and voters have more options on the ballot of who they're able to vote for.
Kathryn, do you also consider it a potential improvement?
No, I don't, Julie. So I'm a retired math professor at UMD, and I and my colleagues have studied alternate voting methods for political elections for several years now. And I taught election methods in a course before, years before letters to the editors started to come in about this topic. This piqued my interest in that instant runoff voting might be a positive election reform. However, after several years of investigation, I know that the proposed ranked choice voting methods do not perform as advertised.
Kathryn, ranked choice voting appears to be working in the Twin Cities. Why would it not work in Duluth?
Well, I think it's more a question of would it be an improvement or would it even work as well as our current methods? And I don't see it as being an improvement. I think it would be a step in the wrong direction for us.
Katie, talk a little bit about what some of your concerns are with the current primary system that we have and why you think this would be so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there is a problem when 17% of voters in this primary election sometimes it's fewer than 17% of voters are deciding who the final people on your ballot will be for the rest of us. And I don't think that 17% is a representative portion of the electorate. We want to make elections more efficient and give voters more choice and more power. And this makes it easier for people who might be working 2 jobs, folks that might be facing mobility issues, busy parents who are struggling to juggle work and soccer practice. Rolling 2 elections into one makes it easier, and it's just an easier option where you have all the choices that you're able to vote on instead of having those choices narrowed down for you by a small group of people. And another problem that it addresses is negative campaigning, which is somewhat of an issue here in the Northland. And with ranked choice voting, it encourages candidates to focus on the issues at hand instead of attacking one another and running negative ads slandering one another.
Katie, are you finding in other communities that have adopted ranked choice voting, are those communities where they have a larger population of younger people as opposed to Duluth? We probably have a population of older folks.
I think, we do have a large student population here in Duluth between St. Scholastica, UMD, and Lake Superior College. Cities around the world of all sizes have adopted ranked choice voting. And I think it would be a great fit for Duluth elections.
Kathryn, why do you think that the primary system that we have is a better alternative?
Well, our current top 2 primary system has been working well for Duluth for many years. Sometimes we have higher voter participation, and some years we have lower voter participation. But they seem to be doing their job in that strong candidates come out of the primaries. This year, for example, we had low voter turnout, but if you look at the candidates who competed and made it through the primary, I think you'll find we have a nice selection of diverse candidates, strong candidates, some well-known candidates, and also candidates who are not so well-known, but worked really hard and came through the primary. I really haven't been hearing people complain about the quality of the candidates produced by the primaries.
Some cities that adopted ranked choice voting have later abandoned ranked choice voting. Why is that? Why do they abandon it?
Well, there's different reasons. The Fair Vote website said that about 12 cities maybe around the country are currently using it. And I've been able to identify 5 or 6 cities and communities that have used it for 1 or 2 elections since about 2005, and then have gone back to their previous methods. And it's because it doesn't deliver on the promises. Often you have a winner of the election who does not achieve a majority of the number of valid ballots that were cast. Sometimes the voting algorithm can give paradoxical results. I know this happened in Burlington, and it happened in
It doesn't
Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado, okay.
And this is Aspen, Colorado, and in Aspen in particular, voters were fairly shocked with who ended up winning the election, that they actually tried to sue the city to see the microfiches of all the ballots. Well, I think it turned out that the voting algorithm was working correctly, and it's just, it can be unpredictable.
Katie, I think that is one of the concerns that people have, that there is kind of this lack of transparency, and that all of these numbers are kind of put into the hat and hocus pocus, and the winner comes out, and there's not a real clear way to follow it for everybody. Isn't that a concern?
You know what? I'm glad you asked, because what we found is that when it was taken to the Minnesota Supreme Court in 2009, a lot of these touted math claims were closely examined, and there was a unanimous ruling that upheld that all the math claims were irrelevant, and that it also upheld the principle of one person, one vote. And a typical strategy that opponents to ranked choice voting like to use is that It is mathematically flawed, it would be confusing to voters, and I trust the judgment of the Minnesota Supreme Court, and I think it's important that we don't try to convolute the issue to make it seem more confusing than it actually is.
Another
The
issue.
the voters' job is really to rank their choices 1, 2, and 3, and that's where their job ends.
Well, it is confusing for several reasons. In order to come up with the candidates that you're going to rank, you need to assess potentially a large field. The last time we had a competitive mayoral race was in 2007. We had 12 mayoral candidates, and quite a few of them were competitive. If that had been a ranked choice voting election, and say Charlie Bell and Ness were in the final round, if you had ranked 3 other candidates and not either of those, your ballot would have been exhausted partway through the election rounds, and when the final runoff came, you would not have a say in who won, whether it would be Bell or Ness. It would be like you voted in the primary, but then were not allowed to have a vote in the general election runoff.
How do you respond to that?
The way I would respond is that the Minnesota Supreme Court heard all these arguments. They found the algorithms to be mathematically sound, and to me, it's just rhetoric to confuse people.
So is
No, I think that's not the issue. The issue is, I think a lot of Duluth voters would not like that. They would not like to rank order their ballot and then find out after the election results came out that their ballot was exhausted and they were not able to weigh in the final round. In the Minneapolis 2013 mayoral election, for example, 20% of ballots were eliminated before the final round. Those 20% did not have a say in the final runoff.
Is the primary reason for ranked choice voting then to do away with primaries?
In this case, so we're talking about amending the city charter, and that would do away with the primary for city councilors and the mayor
Not
here in
school board.
Duluth. Not school board. What we found is that in the past 15 years, a primary has been needed for school board about half the time. The city and the county can look at creative ways to address the primary for school board. But right now we're just focusing on the local level and amending the city
There is
charter.
some concern amongst the news media, particularly broadcast media, that they may not be getting results as quickly as they do now, but usually by 10 o'clock now we've got the results.
Right. So it would make it a bit longer to broadcast the results, but I know in Minneapolis and St. Paul it's been a pretty speedy process. And another important thing to note is that our voting machines in Duluth are already ranked choice voting ready, and all that would be required to get that going would be a software update.
Kathryn, have you been surprised at how many elected officials are actually coming down on your side?
No, I'm not surprised at all, because our elected officials are very tuned into our electorate. They understand the processes involved in city elections. They understand that if we had ranked choice voting general elections, we'd have multiple candidates for mayor, multiple candidates for each city council race, and for the city council at large race, all campaigning and competing right up until election day. We'd have candidate forums where every candidate who wished to be included in the forum would have a chance to be there. You have 12 candidates in a forum. None of them get much time to talk. Not a lot is understood. And busy voters are voters who have busy lives, and many of them are not political junkies and don't keep as close tabs on races as some of the rest of us. Their job of becoming informed on large slates of candidates for several different races and doing due diligence to ballot questions and the school board races, that's going to be quite a task. And I think our city officials understand that.
Talk about that a little bit, because really one of the reasons for the primaries is to narrow that field and to sharpen the discussion, and people toward the end have an opportunity to really get to know those candidates once the field has been winnowed down. What do you say to that argument?
Yeah, I would say that we've seen it work really well in other places. It encourages diversity, and it's more representative when you have all the people voting when voter turnout is at its highest. And some politicians are opposed to this idea because it puts the power back in the hands of the voters. And naturally, people tend to favor a system that they were elected under. What we've also found is that some elected leaders really love this idea and they're ready for innovation. And they see problems with the current system, and they see ranked choice voting to be an improvement across all levels.
I see this as taking power away from voters because, for example, the exhausted ballot problem. When you vote, you rank your 3 candidates for the race, you don't know how those votes are going to be utilized. You don't know if your vote will go to your second rank if your first is eliminated. If your second and third ranked candidates have been eliminated in an earlier round, then when your first candidate is eliminated, your ballot is exhausted. And you won't know whether your vote persists to the final round until the election results come out. To me, that's a loss of voter power, not a gain.
Well, ladies, thank you very much for coming in, and this will be decided at the ballot. So
Thank you.
It sure will.
Thank
And
you.
I'm
All
glad
right.
that Duluth voters will be the ultimate decision makers on this.
And I hope they don't buy this costly ranked choice voting
All right.
experiment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
both.
much.
Now, let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
As the mystery behind the barrels that were dumped in Lake Superior nearly 30 years ago continues, environmentalists are becoming impatient.
It's at least partly amusing, also partly very frustrating and angering, because somebody should have assumed the responsibility for finding those barrels years ago. There's certainly sufficient concern, sufficient reason to be concerned.
Officials have been looking for a sample of some barrels found almost 200 feet below the surface, but they say radiation tests so far have shown no contamination.
We are not going to go into this site assuming it's clean. Everything we touch will be scanned. We developed a completely safe plan of operation. We put no one in danger.
Environmental groups are calling for more action on the search, both from the Army Corps of Engineers, but also from the company that they say was behind the dumping.
Well, ultimately, I think there's no question but that Honeywell is to be held responsible.
And if the barrels are retrieved and found to contain hazardous materials, they want Honeywell to recover all the containers. For Late Edition, Joe Thornton, KDLH News.
A pioneer in Minnesota newspaper publishing and a legend on the Iron Range, Veda Ponikvar passed away Tuesday in Chisholm at the age of 96. Ponikvar was known as the Iron Lady of the Iron Range and lived a remarkable life. She worked in naval intelligence during World War II and came home after the war to publish 2 newspapers in her beloved Chisholm. She became an influential figure in Iron Range politics and helped shape the careers of congressmen and state lawmakers. It would be impossible to tell her entire life story here, but tonight we will remember Veda Ponikvar in her own words, thanks to these excerpts from WDSE's album series in a story that first aired in 1992.
After I graduated from Drake, I came home And I was the editor of the Tribune Herald because the Brown twins had both gone into the service. And they had asked me if I would accept the position, which I did. But I was there for only 6 months, and then I left for the Navy. And when I did that, I was assigned to Naval Intelligence after my commission from Smith, and I was there for 4 years. The experience that I had being at the head of the what was then Yugoslavia, it is no longer, but I headed the Yugoslav desk, the Polish and the Czech. Of course, as far as the activities, the war activities in Poland and Czechoslovakia were concerned, it was quite mute, because Hitler had marched in with his armies and had devastated both of those countries earlier. But there was a great deal of concentration in the country of Yugoslavia. And interestingly enough, there you had a civil war, you had a revolutionary war, you had a global war. My parents were very proud because I also had a sister that went, my sister Jen was in the Army, my brother John was in the Air Force, and I was in the Navy. They were very proud. There were people that I think questioned my dad in the mines where he was working about why he allowed his daughters to go into the service. And his response was, they live in the greatest country in the world, and it is worthy of being defended. There was that intense desire to own a newspaper. And I knew, I wasn't naive to the actualities of life. I really didn't have that kind of money. But I was fortunate from the standpoint that having been in the service, I had a priority as far as getting equipment was concerned. I was always aware of the fact that I would have to do as well or better as my counterparts. And that is one thing that sort of stayed with me all through my life. You don't necessarily have to be out there screaming and yelling and marching and protesting. If you do your job and you do it well, time is on your side. As far as a small town newspaper is concerned, the responsibilities perhaps are greater because you can't put the blame on anybody but yourself if things aren't right. In a large newspaper where you have the news services, Associated Press, INS, and so forth, if something comes through, and because of deadlines and so forth, oftentimes there isn't even the opportunity, and this I can say certainly years ago, and things have gotten much better, but there wasn't the opportunity to always check your stories and check your articles. In a small town, you set the pace, and consequently what you do is being observed by many, and so you have to be accurate, and you have to be right, and you have to do your very best. I think you also have a responsibility in a small town to bring out the flavor and the dreams and hopes of a community, giving the young people their just due and recognizing their accomplishments. First of all, we live in the greatest country in the world. The United States is so precious, and it means so much. Just our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. the American flag. I wish that every individual would recognize how fortunate we are. The other thing is that everything in life that is worthwhile is worth working for. And we all have to work hard. Nothing comes easy, and it's only by dedication and a sense of deep responsibility, morality and integrity that any of these things ever get accomplished. I would do it all again.
Well, it's time to look at some of the week's top business stories now from Business North. Rapidly changing workforce and training needs are forcing college educators to maintain closer relationships with their constituencies. That requires directly soliciting public input, according to University of Wisconsin President Ray Cross. Cross brought that message to UWS Tuesday, where UW system officials hosted a listening session with community members. Cross said he is particularly interested in collaborating with small to medium-sized companies to help them grow and reduce their costs.
Supporters and opponents of copper-nickel mining ramped up their war of words Monday as the Polymet mine and processing plant moves closer to permitting. Friends of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness staged a march to the Department of Natural Resources office in St. Paul, asking that the project not be allowed to move forward. Meanwhile, Iron Range residents gathered at the Aurora Community Center to show their support for the mine. State officials have said the decision on whether or not to issue permits will be based on Polymet meeting formal requirements, not on political pressure.
The Duluth Area Family YMCA has announced plans for a new training and specialty exercise space to be located in its former squash court. The updated space will allow more people to use machines and weights in the existing weight room. The new area will give members more opportunities to take specialty group classes and improve the group exercise experience. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
The federal holiday known as Columbus Day has become a day to celebrate the original people of North America. A group gathered in the Duluth Civic Center Monday to proclaim Indigenous Peoples Day, celebrating the Native Americans who were here when Europeans claimed the continent. About 100 people gathered for speeches and traditional music outside of City Hall. Later, they marched to One Roof Community Housing for a feast and conversation.
We're just about out of time, so if you have a comment on our show, call now. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message, or send an email to almanacnorth@wdsc.org. For the latest news and information from the station, visit the WDSC website, where you will find updates on your favorite local shows and a complete program schedule. Julie, a few snowflakes around the area on Friday afternoon.
It's hard to imagine that less than a week ago we were all walking around in shorts again in 85-degree weather, and now the snow's starting to fly.
Things will be warming up, though, at the beginning of the week. Come Monday, mid to upper 60s, looking better.
Good.
All right, for Julie and the crew at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend, everybody. Good night and be kind.